Hello. So I am going to defend my lesson plan today. My lesson plan is called Should We Get a Class Pet? What the students don't know is I've already picked out the pet we have to get if we get a class pet. And it is a fictional character from a children's book. And the dog may have a few quirks and may be a little silly. So that's our overarching question, not our essential question. It's just something to kind of get them engaged, um, which is a level of not DOK. What is it called? Where you like get them engaged. Oh, UDL, Universal Design for Learning. I completely blinked for a second. So let's get into it. I have a couple things posted on my Google Classroom. So I'm going to real quickly go into what they are and how I'll be using them in my lesson. So we have our class pet lesson plan. Me and you will talk about that one. That is not for my students, that's for me and you, Dr. Gigassi. But we'll talk. Um, Dog breath, classroom presentation, another one that is for both me and my students because I think it's important to share my presentations with my students just in case maybe they have a spot where it's difficult to see the board so they can have the presentation pulled up on their computer and follow along with us. I do really like the classroom presentation I made. Um, so we'll open these in a second and look at them. And then class pet worksheet. One worksheet for one class, for everyone in the class, of course. Um, I'll also, in my lesson plan, I note that I'll have some paper copies of this in case I have students who need them. Sometimes we have technical difficulties. The Wi-Fi doesn't work, or we forget to charge our computer the night before. All good. And then I have Dog Breath by Dave Pikey PDF. That is a PDF version of the children's book we'll be reading in class, the book that I will be reading out loud to them. However, I know that sometimes students have a difficult time remembering, or since I'm using having them pull out evidence from the text, I want them to have the text so they can look back on it and reread it and love and cherish it the way I do. And then in the comments on that is a link to the Spanish audiobook of the children's book. So if I have any English language learners, I got you. Or if my students speak English and know Spanish and they just want to listen to the Spanish version, more power to them. Um, so we will go ahead and open the classroom presentation. Let's open that. Okay, here we have my slideshow. So I'll have this posted um, and it'll say, "Good morning, class. In your journals, please answer the following question. And then, would you rather be forced to dance to every song you hear or sing to every song you hear? And why?" I also have a note that once the bell rings, you'll receive 5 minutes to finish your thoughts. 5 minutes is not a lot of time. So use your time wisely to remind them that they should be sitting down, chilling out, writing in their journal, which tends not to happen with sixth graders. Also, some of them come in late or they wait till the last minute to come and sit down in class. So that's why I gave them 5 minutes. Um, then we have our learning goals, which I'm going to pull up my lesson plan document and go through this in depth, but I just want to give you an overview of my little presentation because I'm very proud of it. Some instructions, so I'll verbally read these instructions off, but they will also have them written down on the board, and they'll also have access to them through Google Classroom if, I flip to the next slide and they're like, wait, I need the instructions. They can just open the slides and look at them. And then more instructions for when they do their graphic organizer. If they, have a little bit of dementia for some reason, or short term memory loss, or just like really get into character as Dory from Nemo, they can have a reminder of what to do. And then, speaking of technical difficulties, it was not moving. Okay, now it's working. Let's practice. So I have it to where I can click on this and it opens me up to class pet worksheet, and then I can fill it out with them or help them and assist them in filling this out, which is very good. And then at the end, we will decide if we keep this fictional dog as a class pet. And we'll decide that as a class by just like them raising their hands for yes. And then the people who say no, we do not want halitosis as a class pet, will just not raise their hands. And then we'll talk and have a good time. The next thing is looking at the worksheet, and then we'll look at the lesson plan. So I will go ahead and bring you to that. Okay, here's the worksheet. So we have it in we have it in Comic Sans. The reason I chose Comic Sans is because it tends to be a very accessible font. So I chose to make it Comic Sans and make it pretty big, so it was easier for people to read. And then once they answer this question, that's their prediction question. So I'm going to ask them, by looking at this cover, post a picture of the cover, which is in my presentation. What do you guys think the problem with Hallie is? And then I also have on the board an example sentence, which says, I believe it says, I think that blank because, or maybe it says, I think that blank is a problem with halitosis because. So it's modeling how to make a prediction, and then they're, practicing how to make a prediction. Some guided practice for you. And they'll have some time to think about it, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. They'll have some time to think about it, and if I realize I give them too much time, I'll just end the timer early and then have them think pair share. So they already did the thinking by writing it down in this box, and then they're pairing with their partner, their neighbor, their shoulder neighbor, because my classroom will be set up in pods. So they'll have 2 here, 2 here. So they'll say, hey, shoulder neighbor, I think that halitosis has bad breath because on the cover his mouth is open and there's green stuff. And then the partner will be like, thank you for sharing. And it will be a good time. And then the second page is pros and cons. So I'm having them do pros, which are, would halitosis be a good pet? What textual evidence or evidence from the pictures that's one of our learning standards, which you'll find out in a second, is aligns with him being a pro. I mean, it aligns with him being a good pet. And then bad pet would be like, do we not want him as a pet, as a classroom pet? And why don't we want him as a classroom pet? Once again, on their own, they will highlight or circle their choices. Circle yes. That means you would love to have halitosis as a class pet. Circle no. You would not like to have halitosis as a class pet. And then that's all we would do for the day. But that's not all we're going to talk about. Because now we get to talk about the actual lesson plan, which is the fun part sometimes. Okay, now we're going to go into the actual for real lesson plan. And I'm going to talk about some things. I just feel like for me, I need to have this open to, let me move my mouse, to be able to talk through the concepts that I need to discuss. So the first thing we'll talk about is my learning standards. I mentioned these a bit, but I chose a writing and reading learning standard since my students are doing both of those things in this lesson. And the first learning standard is develop argumentative writing by introducing and supporting a claim with clear reasons and relevant evidence. I would say they're doing both of those things in this lesson. And then interpret visual elements of a text. This is the reason I chose a picture book also, because it aligns more with the standards. And these standards are decided by each state's Department of Education, and they are a blueprint for schools to write curriculum, which curriculum is written by each school district. And then we have our learning objectives, which you will notice. The first thing I'm sure you'll probably notice is on the scale of depth of knowledge, it goes from 1 to 4. And I have chosen to keep in the realm of 1 to 2 depth of knowledge throughout this lesson. I did this intentionally. This looks like a mistake, but it was intentional because I know that the goal is to have students reach those levels 3 to 4 in every lesson. But I think I felt like it was necessary to make a lesson plan that was very, very much building the foundation for more in-depth lessons. And that was very, very basic and very, very simple, which is why I did it this way. I would actually say that a lot of the content and the stuff I am teaching could be used in a 5th grade classroom very easily. I feel like it could be very easily accommodated for 5th graders, but I'm teaching 6th grade. And the reason I do this is because students, sometimes they come into class with a gap of knowledge. So one student knows more than another student, or one student was from a different school district the previous year, and so they have not gotten to this information yet. They have not learned how to formulate opinions. They have not learned how to give reasons why they have their opinions yet. And so these learning objectives will hopefully act as a tool to close that gap between students. And that's why I stayed in the DOK Level 1, which focuses around reciting facts, reading, not like really requiring analysis, and then recall from a text. And then I have one learning objective, which is the depth of knowledge Level 2. Level 2 is targeted toward inferring, comparing, classifying, and predicting outcomes. And so I'll go ahead and read the learning objectives. Students will be able to identify an author's claim from a given text, DOK Level 1. Students will be able to identify evidence an author uses to support their claim using the given text, DOK Level 1. Notice those two words, which is two adjectives. Identify. Can you identify? Students will be able to make conservations. No. Students will be able to make observations using the text dog breath to predict what will happen next. Inferring. They're inferring, which is good. And they're also using context clues, even though for the inference they are just looking at the cover of a book. They're still using context clues, it's just not in text form. And then we have our essential question, and it's a very simple essential question. Simply, how do writers support their opinion? And then our vocabulary is claim and evidence. I kept it very simple again, and that was intentional. I don't have any secondary vocabulary because I want them to really focus on making claims and finding evidence to support their claims. The goal, the dream, is for every student to walk outside of this lesson being able to say, a claim is when somebody makes a statement about their opinion. Evidence is materials used to support a person's opinion or claim. That is the dream. And then we'll talk about formative, summative performance task assessment. Yeah. So formative is represented a lot in this lesson. That's where they are, it's focused on it. Sorry. It occurs during the learning process, which is not like formative where that occurs. Unlike summative occurs after the learning process. So an example of formative in this specific lesson would be when they're think, pair, sharing after they've written and responded to the would you rather question. I, as a teacher, will be walking around listening in, seeing if these students can state their opinion and give a reason as to why they feel the way they do. Or are some students sort of struggling with this already? And then formative assessment happens once again when we're filling out our graphic organizer. And I am calling on students and having them help me fill out the first two slots. And then I can kind of gauge with those students, are they understanding what I'm saying? Do we need another lesson that talks about claim and evidence? Is it too in-depth? Did I go too in-depth this time? Things like that. It also allows for immediate feedback. So while I'm having them help me fill out that graphic organizer, I will be giving them immediately like, yes, you're on the right track. Or, you know what, that's a really great point you brought out, but I'm thinking that we're trying to go a different direction with this. Things like that. So I'm kind of acting as a guiding hand and also thinking in my, like, analyzing where they're at right now. Summative assessment, however, occurs after the learning process, as we talked about, and it usually results in a grade. During this lesson, there is not an example of summative assessment because they are not ready for their knowledge to be assessed. This is like, I wrote down I thought I wrote down something that was an example of a summative assignment, but a final exam. That would be a example of a summative assessment. Um, and then performance tasks. I have a few examples of those. I want to say that one of my favorite performance assessments, before I did do this lesson, I would have to have talked to them about how to make predictions, because for the class pet worksheet, the first page is them making a prediction. So they need to have that prior knowledge on how to make predictions. But by including this in this lesson plan, I can assess if they understood the lesson I taught them on how to make predictions. So let's say I taught them how to make predictions last week. It's the next week. They've had the weekend to think about it. They've had the weekend to forget about it. Do we need another lesson over predictions, or are most of my students understanding how to make predictions, and that predictions are based on um, not evidence, but based on context clues? And then I have my instructional strategies. We kind of talked about instructional strategies a little bit ago when I was going through my presentation, my PowerPoint presentation, but I will just kind of refresh us. So we had think, pair, share. So for our bell ringer, they're given 5 minutes once the class starts to write an answer to the question on the board. And then once that timer rings, I will say, okay, look at your shoulder partner. Again, they're in pods. And then share your answer with your shoulder partner. My favorite thing I will say about think, pair, share is it forces wait time, like me, to elongate my wait time. Because as a new teacher, I hate standing up there and then no one answers me. And I'm just like, don't everyone talk at once. Y'all getting too excited in here, and then they're all just staring at me like, and I'm like, I know, I feel it too. But this, by giving them 5 minutes to write down their thoughts, it makes me wait for them to fully develop their ideas before they share it, because I've set a timer for both of us. I can't just ask them their thoughts immediately. And then we have differentiation, which is, I wrote graphic organizer. I made a note of that because I think that students often need a graphic organizer to kind of break it down for them. Some students, if you just tell them to pull out pieces of evidence to support your claim, will get very overwhelmed looking at a whole book filled with text and pictures, and they aren't really sure where to start. But by telling them you're making a pros and cons list, I feel like it really simplifies it. And then directional neighbors, and a lot of these activities, they talk to their shoulder partner or their pod. Um, and so that's a good instructional strategy because it also builds a community in your classroom, because your students are connecting with each other, they're sharing ideas. Maybe they're not agreeing, but they're learning how to disagree in a mature manner, which is a very useful skill. And then I also had, thinking aloud. So, think aloud happens when I ask them to help me fill out the first section of that graphic organizer, and they kind of guide me through their thought process, and then I can give that immediate feedback, which connects with formative assessment of like, yes, you're on the right track, or no, we need to try again. And then I'm like guiding them through their thoughts, and thinking aloud. So I'm getting into their thought process. So then I can know where they are going wrong if they are not really getting it yet. And then I also wanted to talk about learning theorist. I chose Bloom's taxonomy, which connects with my lesson, and then David Kolb's experiential learning. We'll start with Bloom. This is very much level 1 of what his remember, understand, and apply levels. So they're remembering how to make claims. They're remembering how to tell their opinions, which they should learn in 5th grade. They should learn how to form opinions in 5th grade, but now we're changing the vocabulary to claims. And then they're understanding how to construct meaning from pictures and illustrations on a book, how to construct meaning from context clues, and they are applying what they have learned, which is how to pull out evidence from a piece of text. So they're pulling out pros and cons and writing them down and deciding, will we keep halitosis? And then after that, I'll instruct them to... Oh, then we have David Kolb before I go to the closure. David Kolb is the king of experiential learning. So I don't feel like I give them a ton of explanation during this lesson. There is not one time where I give a lecture. Most of this is student-led. So they are the ones filling out the worksheets. They're the ones filling out the graphic organizer. They're the ones being guided into the right direction by me. So they're having concrete experiences. The concrete experience is the bell ringer. So that would you rather question is a concrete experience because they are experiencing it for the first time. They just don't really know the vocabulary or what it's called yet. And then abstract conceptualism is the wrap-up activity. I want to ask at the end of class, how do you think that this... No. I will ask at the end of class, what makes a good argument? And so that kind of leads into our next class, where we'll talk about arguing and the right way to argue and the wrong way to argue. And then active experimentation is their graphic organizer. So they're trying their best, even though it might not be the most correct, they're trying something new and they are doing their best to succeed. And then the next thing we will look at is our learner diversity differentiation. We got our UDL. There's 3 categories to UDL. We have engagement and motivation, 3 overarching categories. Engagement and motivation. We have information and representation, and then student action and expression. Each of these categories are broken down into smaller categories, but this is a kind of universal, decided way to differentiate to reach all types of learners. Learners, whether they are visual, kinesthetic, or audio. Yeah. And so for engagement and motivation, I put that the lesson is tailored for students to pretend they are getting a class pet. So when I introduce this lesson, I'm going to really hype it up. I'm going to be like, guys, I think we should get a class pet. And they're going to get so excited. They're going to be like, Miss Abby, we want a bearded dragon. Miss Abby, what is it? Is that a hamster? Are you bringing your hamster? And I'll be like, no. I've picked out one, and I'll be like, it's a dog. And they'll be like, a dog? Oh my God. And I'll be like, yeah, a dog. His name is Halitosis, and he is fictional. But he has a good heart. He does have a little bit of a interesting vibe going on. And they'll be like, what? We're not getting a class pet? And I'll be like, no, like, we're going to read this book and you guys are going to decide if you would keep this animal as a class pet. And then they're going to be like, okay, fine. So I caught them. I grabbed them in and then crushed their dreams and then made them participate in English class. So it's a win-win for both of us. And then the second way I'm engaging them is for a bell ringer. I did a would you rather question. I know that I love would you rather questions and that I will fight people on would you rather questions because I'm always right. So it's just how it is. It's also something they're familiar with. Most students know how to answer a would you rather question. You answer, I would rather, blah, 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 because, blah, 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 blah. So it's a good way to turn something familiar into a learning opportunity. And then for information representation, everything's provided in both verbal and written and visual form to ensure every student is able to follow along with this lesson. Action and expression for students. They are given so many opportunities to tell their opinions and talk about themselves because that's what claims and evidence are. They're just your opinion and being able to back it up by evidence. So they're given a lot of opportunity to interact with each other and share their ideas. Accommodations. Visually impaired, I will be reading the text out loud for anyone who's visually impaired. I also have the book linked in PDF form for anyone who it has hearing issues or a hearing impairment. And then for my English language learners, I have a link commented on the PDF that's the audiobook in Spanish. And for my cognitive processing challenges, this is why I chose a very low-level reading book. It's targeted toward grades 1st through 3rd. So every student should be able to understand this book and synthesize the information given from the text. I did put, but if they need more time on the assignment, they are welcome to take it home for homework. Or honestly, while students are working independently on their graphic organizers, once I kind of get them started, I could have a group of students who really, really need help come to my desk and sit around it, and I would help them. Modifications for English language learners, they will be encouraged to try to write in their target language, their target language being English. But, I think that I was trying to say that they will be encouraged to write in their target language, which is English, but they do not have to. So they will be allowed to write in Spanish or their native language. Many English language learners find verbally communicating their ideas less daunting than writing. I think this is because they often speak English more than writing it, so writing can be difficult. Gifted learners may be offered the opportunity to read alternative text, and the teacher will work with the students to choose the text that meets the learning goals and standards for the day. And then for students who struggle pulling out evidence, they will be provided a word bank. So this will be text from the book in a word bank, and they just have to sort it into pros and cons, which makes it a little less daunting than trying to pull out textual evidence from an entire book. Remediation. This is where the teacher will post agree, disagree, somewhat agree, and somewhat disagree in each corner of the room. And then students will read off a statement that can be answered with these. The teacher will, and then students will be asked to share why they chose to stand where they did after being asked each question. Great, because it gets them moving, it gets them excited to share their own opinions and ideas, and it's a little reminder of how we formulate opinions and how we formulate reasons why. And it also can be a good reminder later when we have the discussion on what makes a good argument. It can be a great lesson on how to be respectful of people when they have opinions that are different from ours. Another lesson we could do is have students split into group books of 4, and then they'll be given a list of items to choose from. Some will be survival items and some unnecessary. They will be told to imagine they are stranded on a desert island and they can take 3 items with them. What would they choose? Again, how do we formulate opinions? Why do we formulate opinions? Where do our opinions come from? And why do we believe such things? So extensions, this takes students to the next level. I put students will practice their argument skills through a mock trial. This, students have to know how to communicate effectively, verbally. They have to know how to be respectful. They have to know how to find really, really good evidence to make their case strong. And they have to learn how to be consistent. So there's a lot of things that go into making a mock trial, but it could help students incorporate everything they've learned from this unit into one activity. And then the second one is each pod is given an envelope of 2 or 3 brain teasers. They are instructed to reason with their peers what they think the answer is and write it down and why. Once they have written the answer down and why they think this way, the teacher will reveal the answer. This one would be pretty quick. It would probably take like 20-15 minutes to do. But the reason I put this as an extension, not remediation, is because I think that it takes a lot more to answer brain teasers intellectually. Like, not to be like, I don't know. Because you really have to synthesize the information being told to you, and you really have to use context clues. And then from those context clues, you have to kind of infer and predict some stuff sometimes. And then you have to use your prior knowledge sometimes, and that comes into play. So some kids may have an advantage over others because they have more prior knowledge or they have specific knowledge as to what the answer as like to the hints are given within the brain teaser. And so it's a lot more challenging than what we're currently doing. And then they have to write a claim and really back up their claim. Why did they how did they come to the answer that they chose? This one, there is a right and wrong answer for the brain teasers. So it's a little more difficult to teach claim and evidence with them, but I think it still works as an activity. And then I have my resources, and then, oh my god, my recording's gonna end, and then my safety, which isn't applicable for me. But yeah, so that was my lesson plan. Thanks.